Hi, everyone. This is Mary Kurek with Frontrunners Innovate, and I have with me today Prashan De Visser. And Prashan is a president and founder of Global Unites out of Sri Lanka. So welcome, Prashan.
Thank you, Mary, to be part of this conversation.
Oh, this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to talking to you because you and I share a common friend, former Congressman and UN Ambassador Mark Siljander. And so that whole subject of peace, as we were just talking before we got on record, is so timely given the unrest that's going on in the world right now, particularly in places like Afghanistan. So we want to talk about what you're doing in the area of peace and conflict resolution and how you're tying in youth to this whole movement. But let's start with your background first. So tell us a little bit about what brought you to the work that you're doing now.
Well, I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and just outside the capital, Colombo. And my parents were always very passionate about serving the community, very committed to their faith, but also that their faith led them to want to respond to the needs of the community. And so we were always pushed to feel that we had to be part of the solution. There were so many problems in our country, and we were here in this country for a purpose, and we had to be part of the solution. So it was kind of inbuilt into our DNA to look at problems and see how we can be a solution. So that kind of phased in the fact that we were in a country in the midst of a civil war, to think about how can young people be involved in peace building? How can we change this reality for ourselves and for the generations after us? So that was a normal transition into that work.
That was natural for you. That was built into your DNA, as you say. Talk to me a little bit about, when you talk about peacemaking, what are some of the conflicts that you're seeing that require that intervention?
So in our context in Sri Lanka, we received independence from the British in 1948. And since then, in these 73 years of independence, we've had cycles of violence almost every 15 to 18 years. And so at each time, it's been young people who've been brainwashed and manipulated to believe that violence was the way. And as a result, our country has never met its potential. There was so many people expected Sri Lanka to be a thriving economy, a country with so much promise, but we always fell short because of these cycles of violence. So our goal has always been, how do we stop these cycles of violence? How do we create an inclusive Sri Lankan identity? And how do we help young people resolve their problems non-violently and intelligently, and not make the same mistakes of the past? And so that's part of our peace building work here in Sri Lanka. But obviously, as we started working, we found that it's not just Sri Lanka. There are so many countries with these similar realities. And we started finding kindred spirits in Afghanistan to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And a long story short, today we are a global movement, and we're working in 13 nations, working youth-led movements for healing, reconciliation, and innovative youth leadership.
I'm going to bring this up because, you and I, like I just said, share Mark Siljander between us. And we know that his approach to creating solutions in conflict and creating peace where there hasn't been any has a lot to do with faith-based principles, I will say. And as a visiting professor at Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School, that's a long title, I feel like there's a piece of that in all of this. Can you tell us where the connecting point is for you?
Yeah. I think for many of us, your purpose and your identity stems out of your faith, whatever your faith is. And it gives you a conviction to dare to do the impossible, a courage to do it in the midst of adversity. And for me, my faith does that. And especially, being a Christian in my context, Christians are a minority religious group in this country. But regardless, there's a belief that I was born in this country because God had a purpose for me to serve my people. And so with that conviction and praying for God's grace and his guidance to serve well, serve selflessly and passionately and effectively, you have to be on your knees and ask God for his grace to do well for all people, regardless of their ethnicity or their religion. And so that's a huge part of the work I do. For me personally, my faith is the foundation that keeps me going and gives me courage to persevere.
And I think that's the one common factor in all countries, that even if there is some kind of conflict that involves violence, at the very, very heart of that is dyed in the wool belief systems that quite often connect to their religious beliefs or their faith-based beliefs. And so kind of cutting through all that and understanding we're all kind of cut from the same cloth, and we're all here on this planet with somebody that hopefully we call a savior and a source, somebody that we believe in, a spirit source. Then it then becomes an issue of figuring out where the commonalities are, not where all the disagreements are. And I think that's really at the heart and soul of everything. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now as a movement. What kinds of activities do you engage the youth in to try to get things to move forward?
Yeah, so one of the key things we do is when we look at countries that have been affected by violent conflict, there's one common denominator, and that has been there's pretty high rates of segregation. These communities that are at odds with each other tend to be living in seclusion. They don't have interaction with each other. And that makes it perfect ground for extremist groups to come and brainwash you to fear the other. And as a result of your fear, to persuade you towards violence against them. And so what we're thinking is, if young people have the opportunity to integrate, to actually meet one another and experience each other, then you have a better chance of them having all the skills they need to deal with, conflicts in the future, or intelligently having conversations and non-violently dealing with it, but also to understand the privilege of living in a diverse world. Even for me, one of the beautiful things of living in Sri Lanka is 4 of the greatest religions in the world in this tiny island. And I have been so blessed to learn from all these religious philosophies, be blessed by these cultures. And that has made me a stronger person. And I'm so glad that I have this diversity. But if I just stay in my own group and my own community, I can start having misconceptions of all people. I can have hatred towards people. And what we've seen time and time again here is there is a lot of inherited prejudice. Young people, they were born into a society where they were told this group is not to be trusted. They are violent. They are dangerous. They're out to get you. So those kinds of inherited prejudice kind of give a bad lens that don't allow you to embrace people for who they are as human beings, as your fellow countrymen. So that's one of the key things we do, whether it's in Sri Lanka or Congo or wherever we engage, is helping people integrate. But then it's also about creating a platform for young leaders to know they're the leaders of today and tomorrow. It's not like, wait your turn, you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about. It's when you have a society and a country that is, stuck in the middle of poverty and corruption and violence, you need innovative new solutions. Whatever they were doing in the past was not working. So your opinion is not only valid, it's crucial. You are going to bring about change. So you shouldn't allow young people to be sidelined. You need to create platforms for them to speak out. And even if the older generation is jaded and overwhelmed and have given up, young people can breathe new life into that context. And so that's one of the key things we do, is give them a platform. Let them speak their ideas. Let them give life to a situation that seems hopeless. And finally, we also believe in the importance of having a strategic plan for these countries, that these young people are not just speaking their ideas and their passions, but they're thinking about, okay, so how do we then as a generation transform our nation economically, politically, in the judiciary, all these different things that have been broken in our society. How can young people now strategically think of, how do we be part of the solution? Not just talk, how do you walk the talk? And not just for a certain season, but for your entire lifetime, because problems that took over 7 decades or 5 decades to happen are not going to go away overnight. It's going to require a generation to work at it, to transform it. So we help young people figure out, what is your solution? How are you going to make it work? How are you going to persevere? How are you going to build the skill sets and build momentum to bring about that change? So that's the 3 most important components of what we do as Global Unites.
That's a lot of work. That is a big challenge, but because you're so organized with it, I see lots of roads to success with this. And I love the way that you kind of explained, the fear factor, the non-connectedness because they're closed off in their own communities, the lack of creating relationships outside their own 4 walls, so to speak, and how you form prejudices and in a lot of cases, what I keep hearing over and over again, the lack of opportunities for youth. And that means opportunities to sustain themselves. They just don't see that. So they get depressed and they feel like they're just kind of stuck where they're at. One of the questions I have for you then, in so many cases where I've spoken with young Africans, they don't have a belief in the government system to help them. And they feel like they're not being heard by the government. And I think probably literally, that is the biggest thing that I hear. The number one thing that I hear. How do you help you've got to work with the existing leaders that are already there before you can get the young leaders to step up and eventually take places where the governing bodies are. How do you connect those dots, because you still have to work with them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's not just Africa, across the developing world, there is huge resentment and a frustration and disappointment with political leadership. In fact, that's one way when you're speaking to an audience, one way to connect immediately across culture, across region is your frustration with the political. But the reality is, what we've said is, if the politicians and the broken structures is a symptom of a deeper problem. You can get rid of the existing politicians and replace them with somebody with the same issue. And so if that's a symptom, then how do you go to changing the national perspective on how we bring about change? So part of that is you start investing in the next generation to have the values, the competencies, the compassion for the people they serve. Very things that you don't see at the top, you start building at the bottom, and ensure that you provide accountability and support for a new generation of leaders to go in and not replicate the same mistakes. But at the same time, as active citizens, you have the right and the responsibility to hold your leaders accountable and to do it effectively. Not because you have a partisan agenda, but because you're a citizen and you care for your nation and the people who are suffering in the midst of corrupt, broken systems. So you have to hold your leaders accountable. And when they know that that's an authentic desire to hold you accountable, and it's not a partisan effort to kick you out of power, there is an opportunity to try and engage and try and lobby for change. It's hard, but I think there is an opportunity. So while you're building the long game, it's also important that you're effective with lobbying and negotiating.
You got, until you can get the system changed, you have to work within the system to figure out how. If you can't get that system to change, then you change the mindset of the people that can drive the bigger change. This is fantastic. So as you move forward in the next year, what do you hope to accomplish with what you're doing?
Well, we feel that one of the key things in all of our countries is that in order to shift public opinion, for people to believe that what the things that we've done in the past is not working, we need a change of our mindset, we need to start creating an inclusive identity and so on, is that you need a critical mass of people believing that and living that out. And so what we're seeing is, if any social movement, most social scientists say that when you have about 5% of your key population engaged, passionate, and active, that's where the pendulum swings in your favor. And to have those numbers, build that critical mass. So for us, we're looking at what's the population of those under the age of 30 in our country, and how do we get to 5% of them becoming vibrant embodiments of what we're talking about, ambassadors for peace, ambassadors for social transformation. And so working towards that, talking of at least 10% of those who are on social media in our countries, who are following what you're saying, you're influencing their mindset, so that you become more profound influencer than any extremist group, any terrorist group, any opportunistic politician or individual. You have to build a bigger base. You can't hope for the best and let these groups continue to destroy society. You have to build your own base. And that's what we're asking these social entrepreneurs, these activists, these young men and women to do in their countries. And that's what we're doing day in and day out. And I believe it's possible. People are always cynical, oh, can you create change from the bottom up? Can grassroots movements really change society? And we're like, well, just within the last 200 years, if you look at the movement led by William Wilberforce to abolish slavery, or if you look at the movements of Mahatma Gandhi or Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King or Mandela, or even the suffragette movement in England for the franchise for women to vote, all those things was from the bottom up. They had no influence to start off with, but they started from the bottom up, and it is possible. And so we need to encourage generation not to give up, not to surrender, but to engage passionately and consistently and effectively until you see change.
Fantastic. So when we talked right before we came on record, you told me about a couple of things coming up. One of them is a book and another one's an event. So share a little bit of those two things with us, if you will.
Sure, I'd love to. We're about to launch a special documentary about the Global Unites family. You know, we have nothing in common culturally, racially, religions-wise, socioeconomically, but what we have in common is all of us were born in the midst of violent conflict. And we want to make sure our children don't have the same legacy. And we're working hard to transform our nations. When we're refusing to leave our countries, we're going to stay there and bring a change. So it's just our story and this documentary of what this movement is about, of us from these 13 and soon to be 15 countries. So that documentary is going to be launched on the 30th of October. It's going to be a virtual launch. It will be a Facebook, and there will be a few other venues. So you can check our website, globalunites.org, or our Facebook page, Global Unites, or any of the other Unites countries, and you'll see more information on that. Secondly, I've been working in peace building and youth development for the last 15 years. And I've been collecting stories and lessons on the powerful impact young people can make. And I've named this book, The Phoenix Generation, Youth Transforming Conflict. When I call it Phoenix, it's like we're literally born into the ashes of violence. We're coming out of the ashes and we want to bring it. So that book is coming up at the end of this year. And I'm looking for people to read, for those who are in countries like ours or whatever country where you're seeing so much division and polarization, to be inspired that change is possible and it begins with you. But at the same time, to understand some strategies and things that we can do as ordinary citizens, but coming together to do extraordinary things. So I just want to give a shout out on those two initiatives.
Wonderful. You've got such a beautiful spirit. You're gonna go far. I know this. I feel it. I feel it. So everyone, if you're watching this on YouTube, go to www.frontrunnersinnovate.com where you'll see this interview as well as some other information. We'll put all of his links that he's sharing with you now. We'll have that located there, and maybe some other pictures if he'll share those with us about what's going on and how he's doing it. So more information and a way to get in touch with him. Last question. So who do you need to help you expand what you're doing?
We always ask for 3 specific types of people who are out there who want to join us. Number 1, if you're a young person in a country that is going through violent conflict or even just polarized to a point. Now, we just launched USA Unites from working on racial and reconciliation in the community. And so wherever if you're a young person, I want to be involved. I want to be part of the solution. Volunteer, get involved. We will make sure you're trained. We'll make sure you're connected with like-minded people and you can start making an impact. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we're a grassroots movement, maybe with one of the smallest budgets for an international movement out there. But it's a challenge to raise resources. So if you feel like you want to give, you could do that on our website. You could do it on social media. But we want to encourage people because that's a need for us to be continuing to expand the operations. And thirdly, if you have certain skill sets, like you may not want to do actual peace building on the ground, but you may have certain skill sets, like you know how to write grants or commit PR and marketing, and some of these skills that have excelled in the corporate world for you, but you want to do it in the nonprofit world and do it in the global south where there are maybe not as many resources, would love for you to join and give us some of those skills to help us up our game and to perform at a higher international standard. So those are just 3 requests, and would love to have your support.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Prashan. It was a pleasure to get to meet with you and to learn a little bit more about your organization, but also the fact that you have one in USA. Since that's where I am, I'm tickled to know that. And we will look for not only the book, but also particularly and that should be out, you said, by the end of the year, correct? The book. Okay, we'll look for that. Will that be on Amazon?
Yes, it will.
Okay. And we'll also be kind of connecting you up, hopefully, to expand some visibility for the documentary, but definitely we'll be keeping up with you on that. So everyone, you've got plenty to look out for, and he's already told you who he's looking for. So if this is you, get in touch. And thank you, Prashan, if you'll stay on for just a second. I have another word for you. And then everybody else, stay tuned for the next interview. Thanks. Bye-bye.